Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of the Antidote. I'm not going to lie to y'all. I'm kind of proud of myself because this is the second week in a row that we have actually done the show, which is a very, very important thing. They tell me consistency matters. And so that is where we are being consistent. We have a really special show today. Also, the world continues to give us wild things. We're going to talk about a couple stories that I think are emblematic of our disconnection, our disease, and some ways that we can actually show up for one another and build some community. You'll notice that I'm in a different place. It is the middle of the day, and I work at home with my partner, and she is in the office. Why that's important for you is this amazing picture behind me that maybe I'll show y'all, but also my dog is running around at my feet. So if you see me look down or anything, you get the real experience right now. You get the whole household in real life on a Thursday afternoon. All right. I think folks are coming in here. You know, sometimes it takes the social medias some time to tell people that we're live. If you're watching at work, don't worry. We won't tell your boss, nothing like that. You deserve a little break. So go ahead and do that. I want to make sure that folks on IG, you all are watching right now. Yes, it seems like that. Perfect. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Ryan Verdon. I am the founder and director of Lear Cultural Coaching, an organization that works on building community through strengthening relationships, alignment, living into values. And this is The Antidote. The Antidote is a show where we break down what's happening in the world, but with a really special question. The question is, how do we heal from this disease of disconnection, of dis-ease? My friend Shelly Touchlook always breaks that down, and I always appreciate that. It's always a reminder that what's going to heal us is coming together, right relationships over right analysis. And so thank you so much for being here. If you have questions, feel free to jump them in the chat. I'll make sure that we touch on those. But we're going to get started with our first story today is one that really just drove me crazy. It got some resonance when I posted about it on social media. Some really wild comments, a lot of really great comments though. And this is comes out of Chicago. You may have saw it. It's a black man. He's at an Airbnb, and he's there with his kids and two white women, one being the property manager, insists that he needs to show his ID. He proves that he is there legitimately, that he should be there, and that he's using the amenities that he paid for. But that doesn't seem to be enough. And then this happened. So I'm going to go ahead and just let y'all see. Let me actually hit play.
I'm sitting out here with the pool with my children. I'm the only black man out here. So the nice white people come out here and tell me if I don't show them my ID, I have to leave. But no one else has to show their ID. So now she's going to call the police on me. And the police are going to come in front of my children. And they smiling. Look at her smiling. They're smiling. She's smiling. But I have residents here.
I don't want to be recorded.
You being recorded. I'll be here. When the police come, I'll be here. So now they're calling the police on me. Karen and her friend, she's smiling because they're going to call the police on me because I don't have an ID on me. Who takes an ID to the swimming pool? And not just that, nobody else has been asked to show their identification. All right, let's see how this works out. This is crazy. Now my children are here. This is in front of my children. Welcome to Chicago. Look at the white man, he's swimming. The guy, there's a kid over there, does he need his ID? They are calling the police on me. This is crazy. This is so crazy. Where you going, Al?
Dad,
What?
you just What's your ID?
I'm not getting my ID. I don't have to show them no ID to be at the pool. Tearing up, and the other lady just smiling. This is crazy. I don't want y'all to be traumatized by this, though. No, don't cry. You don't have to cry. So have a seat, Kingston. They're not going to put me in jail.
Please, just get your ID.
No, we can, just because we're black, we can sit it just like everybody else. Wow, welcome to Chicago. Yeah.
So y'all, that was heartbreaking for me. I'm a father. I know what it means to have your children look at you every day and in the mundane situations and be looking for, how do you carry yourself? How do you conduct yourself? What are your values? And to think about what that man, the lesson he was trying to teach his kid, and the way that he was treated is just heartbreaking. And then to hear that baby say, please go get your ID, as he's breaking into tears, where he already knows this could end poorly for his father, right? Like he knows that in his body. It was just infuriating to me. And I posted about it and I said, this is the type of stuff where white folks, we need to intervene. There are other people there. There were folks around there that could have said, like, hey, what's going on? Like, and I get it, you mind your own business. There's rules, there's all this. But none of that should matter when we see that type of violation of relationships and of human dignity. Because the reality is, nobody else in that pool was being asked for ID. That's obvious to everybody, or should be obvious to everybody. And the fact that the two women resorted to calling authorities as opposed to figuring out how to engage with this man, even if you needed to verify with the property owner, if it was an Airbnb. Well, there were so many ways that you could do this with more humanity. But this is how whiteness operates. It sees Black people in spaces that we don't imagine that Black people should be in. And we react by tapping in the state authorities, the state violence often, or we take matters into our own hands and we rely on the state to say, hey, that was okay. So yeah, that's a story that is going viral right now. Ben Crump just tweeted about it. And it's one of those, living while Black. This is the burden of what race does to those who are on the outside of whiteness. And I think it's time for white folks to realize that, and to realize that that's not the world that we want to live in, and to intervene. That kind of stuff will stop when white people make it stop. At least that's what I said. And there's a whole bunch of comments on my social media disagreeing or agreeing. Feel free to tap into that conversation there. Feel free to tap in here. But more importantly, at least from my perspective, tap in real life when you see stuff like that. So yeah. Moving on to another story that I wanted to talk about. Abdul El Said has won the primary. I'm sure you heard about that. The Michigan primary, Democratic primary, beat Haley Stevens. And Stevens was endorsed by a lot of the Democratic establishment. Had last number I saw was like $30 million of AIPAC money behind her, and lost, which is amazing. Should never have happened, right? When you got $30 million outspending your opponent, it is a seismic shift in politics. And I was watching the news last night with my oldest daughter and my wife, and I was watching CNN, and they were talking about it. I forget, was it Jake Tapper? One of them milquetoast talking heads on CNN, and he said, Said won. He was talking to Ro Khanna. He was interviewing Ro Khanna about it because Ro Khanna is a prominent member of the Progressive Caucus. And the question was, he acknowledged like this is a significant victory. And then his immediate follow-up was, but you didn't win by that much. It was less than like 1.5% or something like that. And like, what does that mean for the Democratic establishment? The fact that it wasn't a blowout. And I paused it and I was talking to my daughter because I wanted her to see This is what the media does. A victory that should not have happened by any measure. You got outspent. You had the Democratic establishment endorsing you, and you win in a swing state. That's not even a deep blue state. That's a swing state. Like, the only narrative that we should be talking about is how powerful and how much momentum the progressives have. But instead, we are being told that we are not, we as in progressives are not winning by enough. And we're being told that we have to chill on messages of Medicare for all and economic justice. El Said's campaign slogan, similar to Mamdani, was money out of politics, money in your pocket, Medicare for all. Like, how is that a divisive slogan? But yet somehow this guy manages to say these things. Watch.
Again last night, when they thought it would be a landslide victory for a hater of Jews and a hater of Israel. This Abdul El-Sayed. Can you believe this? This could only happen to me. Abdul El-Sayed, lovely gentleman. He's a man of hate. And now he's going around saying, no, I love everybody. He doesn't love everybody. He doesn't love Israel. He doesn't love Jewish people. He hates them. He hates them with a passion that burns in his heart, and there's not a frickin' thing he can do about it. Congress, we're working every day to defend the American dream for you and your children. The radical left, the maniacs, they're trying to destroy it with the disaster known as not socialism, communism. It's communism. These are communists. And the polls were wrong again last night when they thought it would be a landslide victory for a hater of Jews and a hater of Israel. This guy hates Jews.
All right, we're gonna stop there because I can only stomach so much of that. But I think it's important that, and we're gonna talk with our guests today a little bit more about this and contextualizing the way that America, our society, white men particularly, really need to tie this idea of like racial dominance and racism to communism and vice versa. If you're for economic justice, they're going to interject some of that racism, like, oh, but Mamdani's a Muslim and he's going to bring Sharia law. Or you can see how Trump is interjecting and doing his thing where he's Abdul El-Sayed, mispronouncing the name, trying to other folks, right, using that race as a division. Fear of communism, back to like the Red Scare tactics. And it's really to our detriment, right? And again, in the spirit of this show, it's really important that we understand that when we reject that type of rhetoric, when we reject what Trump is talking about and really start to think about what actually helps us, we will see that racial justice, movements for racial justice, are actually in our best interest. The dismantling of white supremacy is in our best interest. We will be more healthy. We will have more ability to take care of our families. And more than that, we will actually be in community. We will have connection. The things that actually make human beings happy, we will have more access to, we being white folks. And so to help us make sense of this, I have a very special guest, professor of sociology at Colgate University. Please welcome Chandra Russo. And I don't know if I said it right. I was like, I just got nervous right away. I think I got it. Hello. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for being here.
Please call me Chandra. And that's how you say it.
There we go. I got you.
Listen, I try to name me. Please.
I try to be respectful.
Love that.
You know, but it's a big thing. So you have wrote a book that when I seen, I was like, oh, I have to talk to you. And we have a mutual friend, Shelly, and she was talking about this book. I had done some work with SURJ, but you wrote, and I'm gonna put it up here, White Flank, Organizing White People for Racial Justice. Can you tell us a little bit about one, who you are? Tell us a little bit about you, and then why write this book? Why write about white people organizing for racial justice?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me on your wonderful show, Ryan. My name's Chandra Russo. I am formally an academic, which means I currently am an associate professor of sociology at Colgate University, as you mentioned. I've also been involved myself in movements for racial justice and collective liberation since, we'll say college. So I'll just tell everyone my age obliquely. So like 20, 25 years. And in terms of why this book, I think there are personal reasons that I can state like quite briefly, but then also public facing and political reasons. So, my work as a scholar comes out of my own movement involvement. I have long been interested in this kind of overarching question of how those races white, which is how I am situated, right? How we might get involved in racial justice work in a way that is impactful. Um, and I think I really started to think about these matters when I was exposed to learning communities in college where we were thinking about and reading, amazing Black feminist work, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks. But I was also, I love this piece. I was also in relationships, seeking right relationship over right analysis. So I had the analytic piece in my classes, in my classrooms, in my homework, but I was also building my first relationships with folks of color because like many people in the United States, the legacy of racial segregation, residential segregation means that I was raised in a predominantly white upper middle class context. So yes, there were folks of color in my life, but certainly it was a white majority space. And without giving my whole like movement involvement resume, I'll say that in my research projects to date, so my first book as well as this book, White Flank, I'm really interested in the question of why it is and how it is that we can bring more kinds of people into movements who are not at first glance themselves understood to be the most directly impacted. So I think you and I are quite aligned on how white people have so much to benefit from racial justice, but most people don't think, oh, racial justice, that's about fighting for the rights of white people, right? And like that would be a weird formulation, but also
It's oftentimes even like frowned upon if you say that. Like I've been when I was first when I was first coming to this realization, and I would just love to hear you comment on this, but I think it's important to name like there's a clumsiness with the language and the ideas because it's not talked about so much. And so when you try to interject this, it can become a place where you end up being forced out of places that are and groups and community that's actually very much aligned with what you're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tangly, whiteness is so tangly. Figuring out how to talk and think and act around whiteness is so complicated. And I think stepping back, there's also the fact that, and I think this is something that both you and I have thought about in different ways, like our movements do a lot of policing in ways that are not beneficial to building the kind of large, broad, massive people that I think we ever more clearly see that we need in this moment. But I think it is often a weakness on the left that we are looking for folks with the perfect analysis, right? I keep coming back. I love this piece, this right relationships over right analysis. I wrote it down as soon as you said it. We're looking for people with the perfect analysis. And we're policing folks who don't say exactly the right thing or don't think exactly the way we think. And then when it comes to whiteness, though, there's layers of this, right? Like, so for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, there's really good reason to be wary of white folks coming into movement spaces because we have a fraught history, right?
Right.
But I actually think, and I think my research suggests, I don't know what your lived experience suggests. I know a lot of other aligned folks I've talked to have found that it's actually white people who are most policing other white people around having that perfect analysis, saying the right thing, trying to be the perfect white ally, which I don't know about you, I'm like a highly imperfect human. And most humans I've met and gotten to know, we make mistakes, we mess up. That's like
100%. Listen,
part of it.
I got a list of people that you could ask, and they'll be glad to tell you all the imperfections that I have. Like you can find them. There would be no shortage. But I think that's like you're touching on something that I think is really, really important. And right before this, I was actually on a meeting with a client of mine, and the issue that is popping up in their organization is white folks are so afraid to give real honest feedback to their colleagues of color that it ends up costing them when it comes time for promotions, and when you can't fake it anymore. And it's like what people are telling them is like, well, I've had X amount of reviews, why haven't I been told this ever before? Or you know what I mean? And it's always comes back to some iteration of, well, I didn't want to seem like I was racially insensitive, or I didn't want to say anything that could be racist. And I think what's important that we are both saying, what's different between what we are saying and what, say, folks on the right who might say, like, that's why we shouldn't talk about race, or like, see, everything is about that, and they just want to cancel people. It's not that race doesn't matter, right? Or that you shouldn't not want to be racist, that you shouldn't just not care. It's that being perfect isn't actually what makes you anti-racist or not. It means you can read a script really well, or you can respond to this thing really well. What actually makes you anti-racist is the connections and the community that you build and how you show up. And if everybody can engage with you authentically, and if you can engage authentically, at least that's what I take from your work. That's what I've taken from our conversations so far. Correct me if I'm wrong, or I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I love that. And I also wonder if there might be some danger in making anti-racist into something that someone can be or cannot be. I don't know. I just think that, like, I anti-racism to me is a practice.
Right.
And we're always imperfectly striving towards it. This is like a tiny semantic thing, but I think I've moved away from wanting to call myself a white anti-racist or someone who is anti-racist, and rather talk about my investment in anti-racism and or my efforts to engage in the project of racial justice. It's a really small adjustment, but again, I think it comes back to the like piece of people deciding who gets to count as actually anti-racist versus not.
Yeah. I actually really appreciate that, because I think it does do the work of which I agree with, of getting away from like a character or like who you are as a person as opposed to how you show up. So I really appreciate that.
Good. I'm glad it resonates. I mean, something I talk about in the book is that, like, the analysis I was able to arrive at after hanging out with the groups I got to hang out with is like, I think they're making this really important pivot. It's imperfect. It's messy. I don't want to say like they've just arrived and everything they do is just working great, but is moving away from an understanding, moving towards an understanding that like white supremacy is not about good and bad people. It's about it's about a system, right? And we all so desperately want to feel like good people. We all want to be affirmed, loved, cared for. Like, it doesn't matter your place on the political spectrum. Like, that is a human desire. And when we make the project of racial justice for white people predominantly about aspiring to be a good person, we end up really missing the mark, because people need to be able to learn, and the only way you can learn is to like take risks and make mistakes, and people are going to hold themselves back from that if they're too scared to be cast as a bad person or a bad anti-racist,
I
right?
love that. Absolutely. That's a good. I would love to. There was another question I wanted to ask you, and uh, I think this is again really important piece of this work is that there's actually a history of white people organizing for racial justice. This isn't just like this newfangled like, oh, 21st century millennial, snowflakes trying to be saviors and all that. Like there's a real history of this, and would love to hear you talk about some of that history, because I know that your contextual this work is that's contextual context for this work for the work of White Flame.
Yeah, and I really want to get to that history, and I want to tell you about it in 2 seconds. But there was another piece of what I wanted to say around your first
For sure.
question, which was like, why write this book? And I told you all about Chandra's reasons for writing this book, but I also think like we desperately need models and analysis around what it's going to take to get significant numbers of white people to divest from white supremacy and invest in multiracial democracy, right? We have like a major political party that's routinely promoting like anti-democratic policies. I think of this as consolidating fascism, but like also it has been a bipartisan consensus. It's not just like one, evil party. Like Democrats and Republicans together have created our moment. They have both made policies and procedures for half a century undergirded by racialized fears, anxieties, gendered also. And I think just naming the fact that as a majority, white people continue to invest in our racial whiteness, right? And we believe it to be under threat as the white population,
Right.
even as it's costing us enormously and increasingly. So I want to be clear that yes, I wrote this book because I was personally I've been on a trajectory in thinking about white anti-racism for a very long time, but I also think like our moment and the stakes are pretty high for thinking about what we're gonna do.
Absolutely. Which is actually a great segue to like the history of this. Like this isn't the only moment where the stakes have been
Right.
have been high.
Not at all.
Yeah. Like so let's talk about that.
Yeah. So the folks I study like to say that there have always been white people engaged in racial justice efforts. Always too few, always too infrequently, and always imperfectly. And I mean, I give some contours of this in the book. I go back to the Southern Freedom Movement in the mid 20th century. Honestly, if you're like, I feel like I need a pile of books. If you're interested in amazing, like really bold white led groups who built solidarity partnerships with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I love Amy, Sunny, and James Tracy's book. The title is like great. Hillbilly Nationalists, Urban Race Rebels, and Black Power. I mean,
one of my favorite books.
Yes, it's such a great book, right?
It's great.
It's like white people who have understood that their own fates are deeply tied to dismantling white supremacy. These are folks who threw down, who sacrificed, but not on behalf of anyone other than their own sense of having a deep mutual interest with Black and brown people in Chicago and Philadelphia and New York City. But I mean, we should go way back before the 1900s, right? You, in your amazing book, write about Bacon's Rebellion, right?
Yeah.
1670s, colonial Virginia. I mean, these are, in some sense, it doesn't even make sense to think about Bacon's Rebellion as white people who have thrown down for racial justice, because folks didn't understand themselves as white yet, right? But you so beautifully lay out like the origins of whiteness were about splitting indentured servants from enslaved Africans, breaking their common interest in overthrowing the planter elite, right? They had like so much in
Yeah.
common. And this is where we get like the beginnings of the invention of whiteness in the American colonies, right? 2 centuries later, John Brown, a white abolitionist, he stages this infamous raid on Harper's Ferry. He's really trying to take the arsenal and fight back and free enslaved peoples. And it was a white anti-racist, if we want to put it that way, like a white abolitionist who was the first person in US history executed for treason. So that's mid 1800s, right? I mean, the history, it is as long and old as the American story, as the existence of whiteness, right?
Yeah.
So there have always been people, and I think that there are so many beautiful resources that have like are seeking to bring these stories together, collect them, and make them visible. Because I think that those in power have a deep investment in preventing white people from seeing this history.
Yeah. And I think like that deep investment too, you mentioned the bipartisan nature of this, right? Like that it is a bipartisan project, the maintenance of whiteness. And whenever I talk about John Brown, I do like to think about, or I like to point out, right? Like, so there's John Brown, and he's pre-Civil War, but it's about that time. And folks, sure, they talk about him, maybe not. It's entirely possible to never hear about John Brown and get a degree and move on and live your life and never know who John Brown is. And in the absence of John Brown's story, the abolitionists become the Abraham Lincolns of the world, who were actually not morally disgusted by slavery, right? Like, and Dr. Kendi talks about that. Like, John Brown was morally disgusted. There was and he was very clear about the morality of the institution of slavery and why he was willing to die for it as he did. And to me, that matters. That's like why your work is so important, is because showing folks that there were people who did have the moral clarity, even no matter what time period you're talking about, to say this is wrong. And for me, that's one of the major reasons why folks continuing to talk about race and to write about race, and particularly whiteness, that is such an important thing to do, particularly white folks. So when people say like this is not a white, I'm like, no, not only do my ancestors and people I respect, not only have they told me this is a white people's problem to solve, but the only way to solve it is to actually tell the truth about how white people, and like you said, too few, too far between, too infrequently, imperfectly, but they had a sense of the morality of what they were witnessing, right? Like, and Alex Preddy and Renee Good and Heather Heyer, like that sense of morality has not been completely eradicated from those of us that move in the world as white. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about why this matters to you so much.
That's such a great question. I mean, I could answer it in so many ways. And there was something that kept coming to the surface to me as we were naming these really amazing individuals who have been executed by the state.
Right.
For engaging in multiracial solidarity. And I think it is so important to tell those stories, but I also think that something I wanted to do in this book is move away from the narrative of the heroic individual and show that there are groups and collective contexts that people can participate in that are really doing monumental work to shift the system and fight back against white supremacy. Obviously, we are so far from having arrived, but like the struggle is alive and well and being practiced by so many people, and most people are not, thank goodness, being executed for their work, right? Like
You don't
there's
have to
this,
be a John Brown. There, you could join
right,
SURJ, for example.
right, and of course, like any of us who want to commit our lives to multiracial solidarity, to collective liberation. I'll just call it collective liberation because now here I am talking about folks of any race. Like that is a risky endeavor. It has inherent risks, and goodness knows under our current regime, those risks are growing exponentially. But I also, along with not wanting folks who I don't want the barometer of involvement to be being the perfect white anti-racist. I'm now back to the question of white folks and involvement. I also don't want folks to assume that the only way to do this work well is to stand in front of a tank and be run down. That is something that I respect and honor and am deeply admiring. And those folks generally aren't going out seeking out death. But I wanted to show like a much broader spectrum of what it can look like to be engaged in collective action. So why does this matter to me? I mean, it's
Or even just to the struggle, like that. Why this matters is pretty broad in that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm horrified by the system we're living under. I live in a rural area, and even in a town of 4,000 people, like my neighbors are being kidnapped off the streets and taken to detention centers and really concentration camps. And if you look up the definition of concentration, if you read into like the history of Japanese internment and the history in our country, and you really look at the definition of concentration camps, like we are holding immigrants in concentration camps at this point in history, have been for a while, but it's amplified. So there's nowhere to look where our conditions are not frightening and dehumanizing, and talk about dis-ease, right? And I think I felt that as a young person long before I had the right analysis.
Yeah.
And it's been
Yeah.
with me.
I think, and your point is well taken, and I want to come back to it. And maybe this is maybe I'm speculating, but I think this gets to this part, or maybe it's something I hope people take from your book, and I'm wondering, I would love to hear what you hope. But this idea that you don't have to do this alone, like we're not looking for heroes. There aren't actually any saviors. It's impossible to dismantle something like white supremacy and what we're living in alone. It won't be just one person. It will be collective action. And that while yes, it's important to understand the people who have taken risks, who have experienced the violence of whiteness in ways that a lot of white folks will never experience it, right? But that's not the only way, right? And that there's ways to engage. And I know in the book you are looking at that level, right? The idea that there's that. And I was thinking about is it Angela, not the what I'm totally spacing. She did the nonviolent resistance, and you need 3%. I'm totally spacing. I'm
Erica
gonna find
Chenoweth. Erica
Chenoweth.
Chenoweth.
Thank you. And you know, and that's like what's really inspiring for me. What I hope people take from your book, as I was reading it and as I talk about it, is that you actually don't have to take those risks to make a difference, to be a part of the 3% that moves people away. You can actually just say, like, this is how I show up. It might be in an indivisible rally. It might be at a No Kings thing. It might be at your dinner table in a conversation with your uncle. It might be, and I hope is, at the ballot box and in places like Michigan in the Democratic primary, where we're saying this is our values. It's aligned with the world I want to see, and I am exercising my right, increasingly a dangerous right, and one that they're trying to take away. Like, I don't want to act like it's not. But as of right now, we're not dying as we vote, and God willing, we won't ever be in that position again. And so, yeah, for me, that's something that I do hope folks take away. And I think is really powerful theme in your book, is just the power of collective organizing, and organizing as a return to organizing as legitimate. That sounds too much. That's my own sort of jaded experiences with organizing. I think coming out as like a return. Organizing is the only thing that's going to save us, and it re-inspired me. That's what I will say. Of like, oh yeah, that's why I go through all this, like you know what I mean, the interpersonal conflicts that happen in those spaces. That's why I try to put relationships above analysis, is because it actually is the thing that will cause change, because it doesn't require the greatest sacrifice all the time, right? It requires connection.
Which can be really friggin' hard and exhausting, but is also life-giving. Also life-giving, right? It's like parenting.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what do you hope people take away from your book?
Yeah, so I think about having a few different audiences for this book, right? You know, I'm a college professor, so like for students in my college classroom, who, just based on the context and where I happen to teach, I'm not necessarily teaching my white students about whiteness, or even convincing them that like white supremacy and racism exists. So it's a particular kind of student who I would have in my classroom. But you know, I hope they're learning a bit about the history of white anti-racism. I find that they're often really surprised that white people haven't always only been complicit and racist. But I also really want them, coming back to what you just said, to begin to think about what it means to organize for racial justice. I think that's like a really huge piece of what the book is doing. It's introducing folks who might not be familiar to it, to the idea of political or community organizing. So, you know, my students, and again, I'm sort of in a very like traditional residential college situation. So 18 to 22-year-olds, they've come through the K through 12 system. They're at an elite institution, and they've really been told their whole lives, like, knowledge is power. And knowledge is powerful, but I also want them to realize that like learning and awareness raising and introspection, they're all important, but we can't just learn our way into a different social system, right? We need to act, we need to be strategic, we need to think about what it means to build power. And as you and I have just talked about, like, that's lively and it's messy and it's hard and it's exciting and it's filled with disappointments. But I also want them to think about what it means to actually intentionally build collective power, move into collective action to change systems. And then I also think like another group of folks who are probably, I hope, going to pick up this book are themselves already involved in movements for collective liberation. And so I'm hoping that for some of them, they feel themselves reflected in these pages, that I've been able to like capture and communicate some of their practices and ambitions in ways that are useful for them to think with. And for other groups that might be sort of unfamiliar with this way of doing things, like I hope it inspires imagination and curiosity. Like, especially in this moment, I think the work to document an important moment in movement building and like push our collective efforts forward was really, at the end of the day, the reason why I wanted to write this book.
And I have to apologize because I'm just realizing we didn't even really give an overview. I just jumped into like, so this book is really awesome.
Yeah.
And like, so what you did is you actually engaged with 3 different organizations, or like set groups of people that were organizing.
Yeah, I sought to embed with 3, and then I ultimately grew the project into 5. So I look at 3 different groups that are based in 3 cities. So
Yep.
Los Angeles, Buffalo, New York, Louisville, Kentucky. And then when I was like 2 or 3 years into the research, it was really clear that there were some really exciting activities happening in these more rural white regions, predominantly white regions, in central Appalachia and adjacent. So like really the South, places that are often written off as like the beating heart of white racism, right? So one of those groups is in Ashland, Kentucky, and another is in and around Shelbyville, Tennessee. And I engaged in campaign activities and meetings, and I did about 60 interviews with participants in those groups and leaders and organizers with the Black and Latinx groups with whom they partner. And I'm going to talk social scientific jargon. I sampled on the dependent variable, which means I went into this project wanting to know where are the best practices happening and what are the lessons we can learn, which is not to say that the groups I studied have it figured out, but I went into places where, and I lay this all out in the book, like what was I actually looking for? But I was looking for what it means to organize out of a sense of mutual interest. So engaging in racial justice work as white people because we understand that our fates are aligned with people across racial lines. What does it mean to be really prioritizing building poor and working class power? And where, for the city-based groups, where have there been cross-racial, cross-organizational partnerships that have really endured over time and through campaign cycles? So I think the metric for that at the time of research was like at least 7 years and at least, a few campaign cycles, meaning precise strategic efforts to get a decision maker to do a certain kind of thing. So like a pretty narrow understanding of campaign.
It's a really powerful book. Make sure you check it out. White Flank. I have one more question that I didn't prep you for, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And then we'll wrap up because, like I said, y'all get in the whole Thursday afternoon, and I got to get my daughter. What surprised you coming out of like experiencing that? Those are 5 different communities that are pretty different.
Oh, that's so interesting. I got to go back to a much earlier surprise than like being embedded. And it's a surprise that in some ways I have a little bit of shame around. Which, by the way,
we appreciate vulnerability here on the Antidote.
I've written in different spaces about like shame, and particularly white shame, which is not the kind of shame I'm talking about, as not usually the most productive place to like really land in terms of engaging in pro-social behavior. But I'll bracket that. You know, I myself come from class privilege, and I myself came into a passion for thinking about racial justice and anti-racism in precisely some of the spaces that I end up questioning a bit in the book, which is like places where we are taught to think about white privilege, places where white people are really moved into experiences of guilt. And I do some of this, and I try to have some nuance around this in the book. But this is a long windup to say that very early on in the research, it became clear that SURJ's project is to organize poor and working class white people.
Mhm.
And is really thinking about what that means in rural places in the US South, like places that really have been won over by conservatives and in many cases the extreme right. And there's a nuanced theory of the case that a lot of folks in these places are suffering greatly and have completely just stepped back from politics and civic engagement because they see an impermeable system that does not represent them. But I think I came into this research assuming a little bit or having an unquestioning understanding that poor and working class white people, particularly in conservative areas, were not a useful target demographic for racial justice organizing.
Right.
And that is what completely, like, what I got completely reoriented around is like, if we are going to build movements to change society, like, we have got to be talking to people who we assume we cannot talk to. It's not kumbaya. There are real enemies, but the enemies are up there in general. They are not
100%.
oftentimes, you know,
Yeah.
to our neighbors.
We have a question from a viewer. Is that can we throw that up there?
Love it.
Zolo Hobo says, "Why can't we shame people for their views?" Now I have my thoughts. I would love to have yours.
Mm. If we are talking about shaming as a political tactic that we use to wreak havoc on the powerful, like, we should by all means be shaming people in elected office for their views if those views are abhorrent, right? But if we shame each other around our views, shaming as a verb is interesting here. If we are trying to invite more people in to our work, creating shame generally is not what's going to motivate them to move closer to us. White shame is a really great way to push folks even further into outrageous places on the internet, incel territory, QAnon territory. This question could itself be an hour-long discussion, and it's such an excellent one. But as like a really rudimentary heuristic, I think it is useful to divide whom we call out and whom we call in. And in general, calling out the powerful, which is shaming people for their views, would be one tool among that. Calling in those who don't have individual positions of power. But
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts, Ryan.
Well, so I come from I answer this question from a restorative practitioner place, actually. And I think it's actually, I have no problem doing what I think some people might call shaming, right? And Zolo's in the chat. I'll throw up some more. He's adding some context. Like, if you're racist or classist or ableist, why not shame that, even if you are a part of the working class? Views come with real consequences. We got Trump because of views and white backlash, right? And so this kind of sets up my thing is, I have no problem being antagonistic towards them. But here's my thing. Shame requires that you have some sort of respect for me, that we are in some sort of relationship. And so my view towards you actually impacts how we would rock or how you would show up. Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, Stephen Miller, Russell Vogt, they don't care at all what Ryan Verdon thinks about them or feels about them. So, and quite frankly, neither do a whole lot of conservatives. I'm in Georgia, in Atlanta. A lot of outstate, you get outside of Atlanta Metro, it's Trump country, it's mega country, it's QAnon country. They don't care what I say, they don't, we're not in a relationship. We have no shared experience. And so shame in that, trying to use shame like, oh, you're this, you're that, making you feel bad for your upbringing, your value set, what you've been told, only serves to actually further entrench that me and you are on different sides, that we will always be different. There's no bridge here. But if I can pause that, and I can find a way to connect with you, because most of the time I can. We want the same things. You don't want your grandma dying of curable diseases just like I don't. You don't want your money going to wars in Iran just like I don't.
Right.
You don't want pedophiles running around just like I don't.
Right.
And so if I can connect there and I can show you and we can connect as human beings, now the relationship, and I can share with you my genuine worldview and talk about how I feel connected and I feel healthy and I feel whole, and that this has been such a positive experience for me, expanding my community and who I think I can be in relationship with. Now, shame might be something that you feel, but it's not something I did to you.
Right.
It's the natural result of what happens when you're in relationship and you kind of realize you're wrong or that you're missing out on something. Right? It's a natural part of the human emotion. And I talk about this in my book. That shame then, though, can be a catalyst for change. Mm-hmm. The shame that I think people are often talking about and that I think are using, why can't we shame people, is because fundamentally you just can't shame people. Because you're not in a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. You can antagonize them. And you can communicate to them that they're baskets of deplorables, as you have overseen the American empire and done deplorable things yourself. And so now we can't even have a productive conversation because you want to yell about emails in Benghazi. And I want to talk about why is the American military even here in the first place? 100%. As one example, right? I'm being tangential. So my answer to that is that in a lot of ways, one, I just don't think it's possible to shame people. And from what I've seen, shame requires relationship. And when you're in relationship with people, shame can be a bridge towards change. And that's the most useful thing. And that requires us to actually be supportive, not turn our back. It requires, let me teach, let me fill in, let me facilitate, not let me be in conflict with you or like write you off or cancel you. And unfortunately, I don't think my people, the left, have quite figured that out yet. We're starting to. I think we're starting to. I do. I got one more question and then I got to run. Look at she'll be all right if she has to wait in parent pickup for a little bit. They're just figuring it out beginning of the year. I always end the shows with what's the antidote. So we're in this. We're here. The name of the show is The Antidote. What's the antidote?
All right. I love this question and it's wild. It requires so much hope and a fair amount of arrogance for me to be like, well, here's the antidote. Let me say what I think one of the antidotes is that I learned about in the research for this book, but I'm also, I've just been thinking about it a lot, which is, I think one of the antidotes is to return to local organizing, building relationships in person. I think online, social media, the web, we are using it right now as a platform and it gives us amazing affordances. And I think we are, as a society, so atomized, so lonely. The digital environment often just makes that harder. Speaking about I think the shame question, it's one thing, shaming as an act towards another is like one category of thing. Feeling shame is a different category of thing. I think you did a great job of explaining why you cannot shame someone in a way that actually makes them experience shame. But returning to my antidote, I have been paying attention to this explosion of opposition to data centers across the country, particularly in white, rural, conservative areas, because that's kind of the project of this book.
Yeah.
And to me, it is so immensely promising in some of my early poking around that people, as you were just saying, Ryan, so beautifully, we have so much in common, especially when we talk to each other and we lead with curiosity. And I think coming back again to Zolo's question, what's the problem with shaming someone? Well, if you want to stay in relationship of any kind with that person, research suggests that you ask questions and you figure out what you have in common. And that's the place from which you begin to unpack the biases and bigotry that we all have been socialized into. And I'm not saying everyone's just going to come around and be on your team, our team, the team. But I think that the antidote is returning to traditions that we have lost on the left and that have been under a very careful, very strategic assault over the past century. We need to build local infrastructure for people to engage in leftist projects, particularly in the South, particularly in rural areas, which in the United States continue to be overwhelmingly white. So it's like building for the long term, building up groups, building up formations. I show what that looks like in the book, right? But to me, building that deep bench of
Yes.
organizations that's gonna, come to fruition in 10, 20, 30 years, like the right has been on their project very strategically, very carefully, and starting very locally for the past 50 years. And they got that part of things right. Like starting local is where it's at, in my opinion.
100%. The local school board, all that, like the Daughters of the of America, whatever that is, like all that, the judges, the local judges, well, they weren't concerned about the presidency to some extent. You guys had that. We're flooding the foundation with our people, and then here we are. Here we are. Chandra Russo, thank you so much. Her book is called White Flank: Organizing White People for Racial Justice. Go get that. It is available everywhere. I know that because I got it at a Barnes & Noble. Get it anywhere but Amazon. This is as somebody who's selling his own book on Amazon. Just don't go there. Get it somewhere.
Bookshop.org.
Bookshop.org is where I go. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for spending some time of your Thursday afternoon with me. And let's stay connected.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Peace.
All
right, wonderful people. Thank y'all so much for spending part of your Thursday afternoon with us, talking about white folks and organizing for racial justice. Any questions, anything like that, holler. Get connected on social media. We are back next week. Stay on social media to see what time. I don't know what time that's going to be yet, but thank you for joining. Peace.